Welcome back, guys. Hope you're all doing great. And today's in this video, we are going to understand the use effect hook in the React. So we are going to learn how to use the use effect in a more efficient way in the development and in the production. And we are going to understand the different usages and purposes of the React use effect hook from the beginner level to the advanced level. So here we have an empty React application. So first, we need to understand what is useEffect hook in the React. So basically, useEffect hook in the React that lets you to run some side effects in the function component. So we have a function component. So let me bring some. Let me open any notes or something. Okay, so let me bring it. Okay, so first you need to understand what is the use effect. That's the important questions, right? So what is the use effect hook in the React? So use effect is the is a React hook that lets you to run some side effects inside your functional components. Note that point, inside your function component, not inside your class component. Okay, so here you need to understand what are those side effects include. So those side effect includes fetching the data from the from an API, subscribing to an events, and updating the main DOM elements, and setting up the timers and intervals, and mostly cleaning up the resources. So these kinds of actions and the events are performed inside the use effect, right? So here you need to understand first the syntax of the use effect. So basically, a syntax of a use effect is use effect. E should be capital, and it's a function. Inside that function, it's going to take two different parameters. The first parameter is going to be an arrow function, and the second parameter is going to be the dependencies. This is basically the syntax of the your use effect hook, right? So here, like when you're working with the use effect, the most important stuff that you need to understand is when does this use effect run. That's the most important stuff you need to understand. So basically we have this empty dependencies, right? So inside this arrow function only, we do all the actions based on the events, or subscribing the events, or cleaning up resources. All those things will be performed, and this dependencies defined when it needs to run and how many times it needs to run, and like those actions, the time durations, like not the time durations, these dependencies define those the number of times. Okay, so let me show you. So the first of, let's run this application. So use effect, let me import that. Please make sure the package is import from the React, and let's bring the arrow function. And this time I'm not supplying any array dependencies, right? Without array dependencies, if I run this application, let's say console.log running inside the use effect, something like this. Okay, if I save this application and if I refresh this, you should be able to see the use effect is performed two different times over here, right? So don't worry about this. I will explain why the use effect is running two times, and not in the production mode but only on the development mode. Why it is running two different times, I will explain it at the end. So stay tuned and watch the complete video. Before that, we need to understand all these stuffs related to the use effect. Then I will answer this question. This is the most common interview questions that you can find at any interview when you're facing the interview for based on the React, right? So let's discuss that part at the end. Okay, so this is the syntax. Now you can see it's running, and we can see that console log on the client side. So how does it run? So this time I didn't give any dependencies. So over here you can see we have the dependencies arrays, and when it runs, so basically if you don't supply any dependencies, if I didn't supply any dependencies, what happens? It runs after every single render. Okay, if any state changes happening inside that particular component, it is going to rerun that use effect again and again if you didn't supply any dependencies. But if you are supplying this square bracket as an empty square brackets, so it is going to run only once, when only by the time when the component did mount on your DOM element. Okay, And if you're supplying any value in it, which means if that particular value changes, then it needs to rerun that particular dependencies that use effect again. So the cleanup functions, when you're working up with the cleanup function, when the component gets unmounted or when the components getting mounted again, so at that point this use effect gets rerun again. Okay, these are the changes that happens every time if you're supplying your array dependency injections over here. That's based on that value. This will get runs again and again and again and again. Okay, fine. So now like this is basically the beginner approach for understanding how does the use effect it work without no dependencies, because basically it's not recommended, right? So but if you supply a single, this will run only one time, right? So the most important thing that you need to understand, if I don't supply this empty array, so the problem it's going to be it runs on every state updates inside the component. That will cause the serious performance issue, right? So what happens if I supply this empty dependencies? Use effect with the empty dependencies, that's the most common for the first time for the beginners every time they work with the API calling, right? Calling an API, right? So let's try to work on the API calling over here. Okay, so for that I do have an API, I do have a project over here. So if you want to build a full stack multi-store applications, so I drop the link in the description so you can go ahead and look into this project. So I'm going to use this free API over here. So I'm going to copy this, and if I copy this API, and that is going to give me a complete data, right? This is the data, that's the data I want to receive inside over here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to delete this. Okay, then I'm going to write a function to fetch. Okay, so mostly what happens, so I'm just going to directly write the API over here, fetch, paste the API. Okay, then inside this fetch method, right after here I'm going to get this dot, then dot catch if there is any error. Okay, so we are going to get that error as well as, so error, then I'm just going to say console.log whatever the error it is. If I get the response successfully, then I'm going to send that response in the JSON format. Okay, once it's successfully written, I'm going to collect the data from it. Then I'm just going to say console.log whatever the data I do received, I have to print the data over here. Okay, this is the basic stuff that we are going to do. Now if I refresh this, see, okay, so we are getting an API error. Okay, my bad. So that the API it's showing as the cross origin issue. Okay, fine. So maybe because of the cross origin, that the API it's blocking inside the React application. So don't worry about that. Simply search for JSON placeholder.typecode.com or simply search for JSON placeholder API. So they give you a free API to check with that. Then I'm just going to replace this API just like that. Okay, so here if I run this, see, we are getting that user data, and we are basically based on that ID we are getting the user data from that specific API, which means that the API and this code whatever we have in our hand, it's working. So this is the beginner level approach, right? So what happens over here, what exactly happening over here? So when the component mounts, this use effect is going to run. So if it is getting run, the data is being fetched and it's being console logged over here. Okay, this is beginner friendly. There is no error handling in here, no loading state in here, and there is no cleanup functions also in there, right? But okay, so let's say instead of this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the dynamic string literals. Then I'm gonna change this like based on the ID. Okay, so here I'm gonna have the use state, which is basically going to be an ID, set ID. By default it's going to be 1, and every time whenever the ID gets changed, this needs to be rerun. Okay, this needs to be rerun. All right, so right after here what I'm going to do is I'm going to have a button. This is, let's keep it as minus, and here I'm just going to print the ID inside a span tag, which is the ID. Let's print the ID, and for oops, this needs to be button, and the type of the button needs to be the button itself, and inside this button, which is going to be minus, and here I'm just going to change it to plus. So what I'm going to do, on click, whenever I'm clicking this function, I'm going to collect the callback function. Then I'm going to say set ID. I'm going to collect the previous value, whatever I stored in the ID. Then I'm going to say previous value minus 1. Okay. So the same goes over here. On click, every time whenever I click that function, I'm going to get a callback function to run it. Then set ID, you call that set ID function to update the state value, collect the previous value. Then inside over here, I'm just going to say previous value plus 1. Save it. Now we have that. Okay. So once I refresh this, see, refresh it, I'm getting the data, right? The reason is because by default the state value is 1. Now if I change the value to 2, the useEffect will get rerun because the ID value gets updated. So I'm getting the newly updated value, right? So whenever there is a changes on the useEffect, this particular ID, so that value is supplied inside the array dependencies. So the dependency value gets changed. So this useEffect value get rerun. Okay, this is useful mostly for the dynamic pages, right? So basically this doesn't have any error handling, any stuffs, nothing, right? So what we can do is, since we are using the fetching an API, so basically that the API needs to be an asynchronous operation. So what we have to do is, I'm just going to remove this ID be here, and I'm going to cut this out completely. Then I'm gonna get a function const fetch data. I'm gonna put a function inside that. Then I'm gonna create as an asynchronous arrow function that makes sure that function is an asynchronous function. Then I'm going to paste it. So here basically what we are doing, we are receiving the response, right? So instead of using this, what I'm going to do, I'm just going to say const response equals to await fetch. We are collecting the response in a separate variable. Then I'm going to set that data over here. Data is equals to, I'm going to use await response dot JSON data. Okay. Then I'm just going to simply say console.log data. Whatever the data we are receiving, we are going to console it. So close it. And here I'm just, instead of supplying the ID, I'm not going to supply any ID. So let's refresh this. This doesn't work because we haven't called that function. Inside the useEffect itself, you have to call that function. Now if you refresh it, you can see we are collecting 200 data objects, right? So why we have to keep a function inside? useEffect callback cannot be an asynchronous function. This callback function, it cannot be an asynchronous function. So that's the reason we have to keep an function inside, which that function can be an asynchronous function to perform the asynchronous operations, right? This is the best practices for the beginner level. Now let's try this with an advanced approach. Okay, so now let's move to the production level pattern, like how we can do that. So what I'm going to do is, I'm just going to create myself one more variable called set is mounted is equals to, I'm going to assign that value as true. Okay, so then we have this fetch data function. Inside this function, I'm just going to literally cut everything. Then I'm just going to say we are going to have one more state, which is going to be use state snippet loading. Let me bring that loading. By default, it's going to be false. So inside over here, inside the fetch data, what I'm going to do is, I'm going to bring the try and catch. This is basically the exception handler to handling the runtime issues and everything. Inside the try, I'm going to say set loading. By default, it's going to be true, right? Inside the catch statement, if there is any error is happening, what we have to do, we have to set that error as well as. So I'm just going to say use state snippet error, set error, and by default it's going to be an empty string. And here whatever the error is going to happen, I'm just going to say set error I'm going to bring the dynamic string literals. So here, failed to load the data. And what is that main error that is caused? So we have to print that error. Okay. And inside the catch finally statement will be executed both the try after successfully executing the try block and after executing the catch block as well as, right? So here I'm just going to say set loading as false. Okay. Now inside, right after this set loading, this is the place where we are going to call that the data and everything. And here I'm just going to close that. So here what I'm going to say, if is mounted, if that value is true, only the component is successfully get mounted, then I'm just going to do this stuff. What we can say, I'm going to create use state post, and then I'm just going to keep an null value in it. Here I'm just going to say set post. I'm going to assign that data into it. Okay. So by the end, we are calling that function. Then right after here, return, I'm going to have a callback cleanup function, open it. I'm just going to assign the is mounted value as the false value. So save it. Okay. So now if I run this application, because we don't have any console.log, and here I'm just going to say if it is loading, if it's loading, then I'm just going to simply display the text inside a span tag, which is going to say loading. If it is not loading, then I'm going to bring that the post. I'm going to check one more condition, which is going to be bring a empty React fragment. Here I'm going to check one more condition. If the post and the post dot length, if the length is greater than 0, then I need to render this. Okay, what I'm going to render, I'm just going to simply say post dot length. That's it. Okay, so currently we are getting the text as, so let me hide this one. So we are getting the text as post as 200. Now if I refresh this, you can see a glimpse of text saying loading, and we are displaying the text as the 200, right? So basically what happened here is, so this will prevent the state updates even after the unmount. Okay, so this approach prevents the data states getting updated after the unmount, and this is how they usually handles the real world scenarios. Okay, so this is all about how to work with the API functions and working with the cleanup as well as, right? So this is the best approach for working with the real case scenarios. Now let's talk about like cleanup functions, how they are handling the event handlers, how we can handle the event handlers when we are working with the useEffect functions. Okay, so here I'm going to create myself one more useEffect function, open it, a callback function in it, open it. Inside over here, I'm going to have an empty array injection. Then here, I'm just going to say const handle resize, the window resize. Okay, it's going to be a callback function. This just going to console log the value whenever the window get resized. I'm going to access the inner width of that window, then I'm just going to print it. That's it. Okay, then right after here, I'm going to add an event listener for the window. Indo.add event listener. What event listener we are trying to do? Resize. Sorry, not resist, resize. Whenever I'm resizing it, it needs to call this handle resize function. So supply that functions as the reference. Then by whenever this comp get unmount, I need to clean up this functions. So here I'm just going to say remove event listener, open it. What event listener we created? Resize event listener, and supply that function as the reference. Okay, so this is how you can work with the cleanup function. This is how you need to set up the cleanup functions. So the cleanup runs when the component gets unmounted, right? So if I refresh this, okay, and if I see adjusted the screen, and you can see we are getting the console.log on our screen. Okay, so the reason we need to keep this resize this written statement for cleaning up, it's because to like what say, to avoid the unnecessary reruns. That's the reason. So this event listener can cause a series of performance issue if you're not handling it properly. That's the most important stuff. Okay. Yeah, so the like previously we discussed about this one, right? Like a best approach for the real case scenarios, right? So in order to prevent an unnecessary API calls and all those stuffs, we can use the abort controller, right? So that's the advanced stuff and the recommended stuff when you're working with the real case scenarios. So let's see how we can work with the about controller. So I'm going to pass that one. Okay, I'm going to pass it. And here, what I'm going to do, I'm going to get the useEffect hook one more time and bring the array injections in it. Then inside over here, I'm going to create myself a controller. Controller is equals to new abort controller. New abort controller. Okay, so here the new abort controller, it's basically what we say. So let's understand the abort controller first. So abort controller, it's a browser API that allows you to cancel on ongoing asynchronous operations like the data fetch. Like, let's keep it in right mind for the time being. Okay, so then we can understand the difference between why and why we have to go for abort controller. Okay, so I will explain that part, but for the time being, you just try to understand abort controller is a browser API that allows you to cancel an ongoing operations like the fetch. Okay, so now what we can do is, using the abort controller, we already created that abort controller. Then we can keep this. And here I'm just going to bring this, copy it, and I'm going to put it over here. And okay, this time I'm not going to use any wait. Okay, so this is going to say dot, then I'm going to collect the response, then I'm just going to return the response.json out of it. Then I'm going to use this one more handle that promise, because it is going to return a data promise. Then we need to handle that data properly. So I'm just going to say set post as the data. Then right after that, I need to handle the error as well as, so dot catch, let's say get the error. Then I'm just going to say set error, get that error and assign that error into it. Okay, so here, instead of directly setting it into it, open it. Let me command this function. Okay, open it. Inside over here, what I'm going to do, if I need to set the error, if the error dot name, if it is not equals to abort error, if it is not equals to abort error, then only I need to set that error into the error state in order to set it, because otherwise user aborted that fetch. So how can we print that as an error? So that's the reason, right? Then at the end, I'm just going to say return equals to controller dot abort. Okay, so this is the safest approach and the production ready approach and the strict mode compatible. Okay, this is how you can use the data fetch when you are working with the production level approach. Okay, you can still see we are getting that data fetching over here. Okay, which it will works because we are using the abort controller for canceling the ongoing like what is it, ongoing data fetch as well as. Okay, so yeah, so what's the difference You need to understand the difference between these two, right? Why we need to have the abort control. We all know that abort control is a browser API that allows you to cancel an ongoing API asynchronous operations, right? So think of it like this. So when you're using the fetch, what happening? That will start a network request, right? So abort controller is a remote control. So why we need that remote control? To cancel that ongoing fetch, right? So abort is the function that helps you to stop that action, right? So why I need to use the abort control? In the real problem it solves, right? Without abort controller, what happens? API keeps running even after the component gets unmounted. That's an issue, right? And the states also get updated even the component gets destroyed, right? And the React shows the warning signs, and memory leak happens at that point. So the duplicate requests keep on triggered inside the strict mode. These are the things that happens with this situation. Okay, so when you're using the abort controller, right, when you're using the abort controller, what happens? See, these are the stuffs gets happen. So you can cancel all the API calls, so that stops the unnecessary network request. Then we can prevent the memory leaks, so no states gets updated even after the component get unmounted. Okay, and it will handle in strict mode. So safe, and basically it's a safe double execution. So useEffect gets runs 2 times inside the strict mode on the development mode, right? So it will improve the performance by avoiding unwanted network usages. So it has a clean error handling functions because abort error is expected to run in that specific way. Okay, that's the beauty of using with this abort controller and all those stuffs. Okay, so I hope you guys understand the differentiations of working with the use effects, and we learned some stuff about that from the beginner to the advanced level stuff, right? So in this case, earlier I said the use effect gets run 2 different times, right? It will get 2 different run, right? So on a development mode, the use effect gets run 2 times, right? So this is the very common React interview questions. You should be ready when you're for React interview. This is the most very important question that will cost commonly in the interview. Why does the use effect run twice in a local host? That means development, but not in the production. The same code run 2 times in the development mode, but not in the production mode. The short answer is, in development mode, React intentionally run the use effect twice when the strict mode is enabled to help to detect the side effects and the unsafe code. In production, this extra execution is removed. That's the answer. That's this one-line version, right? So the real reason, the important concept behind this is the React strict mode. In development only, the React strict mode, whenever you create a React app or a Next app, strict mode is enabled by default in the development mode. Okay, that is because if you check your main.jsx, you can see the strict mode is enabled over here. Strict mode affects only on the development. It does not run in your production environment. Okay, so what exactly happens in the development when the strict mode is enabled? So React intentionally does the following sequences, like the components mounts, and first the component gets mounted, use effect runs, then the cleanup function get runs, then component mounts again, the use effect runs again, right? This happens only once and only in development. Okay, so these are the stuffs that gets intentionally run by the here. These are the stuffs gets run intentionally run in the development mode. So why React does this? That's the important question. Why we need to do this stuff? So React wants to detect some side effects like the bugs early itself, such as API calls without cleanup functions and the memory leaks inside the use effects, and mutating the external variables, and the subscriptions which is not cleaned properly, and effects that depends on the render ordered. So if you're having a multiple and unhandled rendering, it causes a series of memory performance issue and memory leaks. So React simulates the mount, unmount, mount to verify the use effect is safe to run it. The effect is safe to run. So what is the React simulates? So the React simulates. First, what happens? It will get the mount, then it gets unmount, then it's mount again. That's how the in the development mode it gets work. Okay. So this is the core reason. These are the core reason, right? Let me bring that core reasons as well as these are the core reason. This is the core reasons. API calls without cleanup, memory leaks, mutating external variables, subscriptions, and the effects in the defense order, right? So that's the main reason that the use effect is running 2 times in the development mode but not in the production mode. The reason is because of your strict mode. Because of the strict mode only, it is running twice in the development mode. All right. So I hope you understand the most important key details about the use effect hook. And if you have any questions or regarding this, or if I explain anything wrong, so please don't hesitate to point out in the comment section, and I'm happy to correct myself and learn it. And if you have any questions or doubts or anything related to the use effects or any kind of React concepts, please drop the doubts in the comment section. I'm happy to help you out. All right. So stay tuned. We are coming up with the lot of interesting concepts in the next videos. Welcome back, guys. Hope you are doing great. In our previous video, we learned how to work with the React hooks like useEffect, useContext, and some state management libraries like Suspense and Redux Toolkit. But today in this video, we are going to answer a very important question, which is useEffect really the best way to fetch the data in modern React? Well, in this video, you're going to learn why useEffect is not ideal for data fetching, how React Query works, and how Suspense amplifies the loading states, and how lazy loading improves the performance. And finally, we're going to build a professional and production ready setup for data fetching by using the Suspense fallback UI, lazy loading, and along with the useQuery, the React query. Okay, so if you haven't watched the previous video, so you can watch them by click the link in the description below, or you can tap it on the top right side corner. So please go ahead and watch those React hooks concepts, then you can jump in over here. All right, so without wasting your time, let's get started. So here I do already have a plain empty React application with JavaScript. So let me be in my app.jsx. So in this very first section, we're going to discuss the problem with the use effect. So what's the real problem with the use effect? Okay. So let's understand the problem with the use effect. So for that, we need an API. So I'm just going to use the JSON placeholder API. This one, the fake test. Okay. So we can use this. So here in the app.jsx, I'm going to use the use effect. Let's bring the use effect hook. It has two different parameters. One is the function and another one was the array dependency. Inside this function, I'm just going to simply copy this code and I'm going to paste it. Instead of fetching just this to do's, I'm going to fetch the post. I'm going to use this one, post. Okay, so it's going to fetch the data and it's going to log the data in our application. Okay, so for that, save it. I'm just going to inspect the elements, and in the console, if you check it out, you can see we have the hundreds of arrays of data. Okay, so it works, but if you think it is really efficient, but it's not. So we need the use state, right? Of course, insert over here to store the data, we need a local state to collect it and store it. That's the first point. Then we need the loading state. So here, if due to some reasons, if the APIs are getting some time lags or anything, it needs to show some fallback UI like a loading state. We don't have that, but we need to include it. Then here it doesn't have a proper error handling. We need to catch the error and we need to display the error and we need to intimate the user that is some issues happening over here. So you can try again later, something like that. Then we need a proper cleanup. Then we need an abort controller, right? If the user doesn't want to load the data, we need to show the abort controller for the user. Then we need to handle the everything in the strict mode, right? So this is too much responsibility for one particular hook, which is the use effect. So use effect was never designed as a data fetching solution, right? So what is the solution? So this is the place where we have to talk about the React query. This guy. So the React query is the library, which is nothing but it's just a library which that manages the server state for us. Okay. So let me highlight the key points. What are the key points? So it handle the first, what is it's going to handle? It's going to handle the caching. Then it's going to handle the deduplications. Deduplication is nothing but is a process of scanning and eliminating the duplicate records. Then background refresh. We need to refresh every single data that needs to be refetched at a certain points, right? So refetch. Then automatic loading and error handling. Automatic loading and error handling. That's the most important thing that we need to worry about. So instead of managing everything manually, we describe what data we want and the React query handles the rest. We don't have to handle anything less than that. So let me show you how to do that now. So let me explain the syntax and later we can talk about it much later. Okay. So here, for instance, instead of handling these stuffs like this, okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to have a function. For instance, let's say const fetch data post something like this, an arrow function, open it, which in case this function needs to be an asynchronous function. Okay. And inside here, I'm just going to say const response is equals to await fetch. We need to get that data. So let's apply the API, copy it and supply it over here. Okay. Then at the end, it's going to return the response.json data. Okay. This is just a function. Then right after here, we are going to use the useQuery hook, which is the third external library. So I'm just going to extract an object from where? From useQuery, which we don't have that package yet. So don't worry. Later I will show you what are the package that you need to download and install. But at this point, I'm just going to explain you the syntax and the situations. Okay. So here, this you need to supply the query key. Query key. So this is going to be the post. Then you need to supply the query function, which that function is going to be your fetch data post. Okay. And inside here, I need to fetch the data, whether it is still loading or is there any error is happening. These are the data instance that we can get returned back from the use queries. Okay, so let me explain what is all these stuffs over here. So here the query key, that's the most important thing. That's the unique catch identifier. So this is the place where we are collecting the data and making sure which one is because in a real case scenarios, you might fetch multiple data from the APIs. So you need to access the unique key identifiers for each and every data fetch. Then you need to supply the query function, the function that which fetches the data. Okay. Then the React query, what is it exactly is doing? It catches the every results. Okay, so it doesn't need to refetch the data without any updates or anything, right? It catches the results completely, and then it shares it across the components. You can share the data across any component, and the refetches. It's completely intelligent. Okay, so it doesn't refetch for a certain time period again and again. The refetch is completely intelligent. If there is no changes, it's not going to do that. Okay. Then let's talk about the next important stuff that we need to. Once since we have the data now how we are going to supply it into the component, right? So that's the place where we have to discuss about the suspense. So React suspense, that React passes during the time of rendering, right? So React suspense let React pass rendering until something is ready behind the step. So if something is still loading, the suspense will show the fallback UI and make sure that the rest of the stuff is completely ready to show in the client side. Until then, it is going to display the fallback UI, right? So here, instead of loading something, so we used to do this, right? If it's loading, it's return. If it is still loading, we will return a separate component, right? Instead of doing that, what we will do, we load the suspense. We load the suspense. Then we'll set a fallback UI with the loading component until this post is completely ready. Until it's getting ready, it's going to display this fallback UI. So that's the beauty of using the suspense. Okay, so I'm just explaining why we need all these stuffs, and later I will show you the code completely so you can understand and you can visualize how all these stuffs are being working, right? Because if I'm not explaining it properly and writing directly the code, it is not going to help you out. So just try to listen and understand what are these purposes of these particular packages and everything. Now we know the suspense. Now how we can work with the suspense and the React query. So here we have one more option straight away. Right after here you have the suspense, which is you need to enable it as true when you're working with the React query. So the React query throws a promise and the suspense catches it. So the fallback UI will shows. And once the rendering resumes automatically, once the promise is being handled properly, it resumes automatically, right? That's the beauty of comparing the React query with the suspense, because it doesn't you don't need no is loading or no conditional rendering or no UI for the special for especially with the conditional rendering. And this is much cleaner code compared to this particular guy. Okay, that's the beauty of handling this. Now the third problem, when you're working with this, what happens if something issue is there, something runtime error is happening, how it is being handled, right? So because we have a separate stuff for the error, we can catch it, but how we are going to handle it, how we are going to display it in the screen, that's the most important thing. Suspense handles your loading issues, right? It's handled it properly, but doesn't handle your errors. So you need something to handle the error, and that's the place where we have to discuss about the error boundaries. Error boundary. So suspense handles only the loading things. It doesn't handles the error, and that's the reason we use this error boundary guy. So how the coding should looks like, we use the error boundary component just like this. For the fallback, for the error component, we display the separate fallback UI, and for the loading, we use a separate fallback UI if everything is properly loaded, and we are going to display this post. So this gives us the full control over the loading and the error states as well as okay. And now let's talk about the one last thing, which is going to be your lazy loading. This is the most stuff you need to understand why we need the lazy loading. Basically, the lazy loading helps us to reduce the bundle size. It helps you to reduce the bundle size. So why we need the lazy loading? So the code is only loaded only when it's needed. Okay, because we need to keep the initial loading much faster, because if the component is too heavy, it takes some time to load on the client side. So if that component is needed, then load it. Otherwise, keep it. I don't want to load it. Then that's the place we need to use the lazy loading. So this is really helpful when it's perfect for the routes, and it's really perfect for the heavy pages, right? So here, think about it. The post, if the post is going to be receiving thousands and thousands or millions of records instant by the time when it's getting loading, it's going to be literally huge. So that's the place where we need to use the lazy loading. Think about it. For the post, that's a component, right? So that I need to load that. So I'm going to use the lazy function, which is provided by the React. So I need to call a callback function, and I need to use the import. This needs to be imported dynamically only when I need it. So by this way, and we will put the post inside over here. So the lazy loading handles only if that component is being needed, then it gets loaded. Otherwise, it will not be loaded. Okay. So these are all the theory stuffs about what are the things that we are going to discuss about. What is the section one we discussed about what is the issue with the useEffect, and we talked about the use query. Then we talked about the suspense. Then we talked about the error boundaries. Then we talked about the lazy loading. Now let's talk about how to implement all these stuff and build a professional level coding. Okay, so let's jump into the coding part. So before jumping into the coding part, we need a package that needs to be downloaded for the React query, right? So for working with the React query, we need to download this tan stack React query, tan stack React query. This is the one. You can go through it, how to work with all these stuffs and everything. This is the package that you need to download. Okay, so I'm gonna say npm add at tan stack React query. So hit the enter, let it download and clear it, then npm run dev. Close this. All right, now let me get into the main.jsx. This is the place. So here I'm just going to simply load the app because that's the stuff which we discussed previously, so I don't want to worry about that now. Let me close that. Then here what I need to do is I need to bring certain stuff, import stuff. So import from where? From the tan stack React query. From this React query, we need the query client to create a query client. Then we need to create a provider component. So let's bring the query client provider. So I need to wrap this app inside that query client provider. So the entire app will be wrapped inside that provider. Now I need to supply this client, right? So client, I need to create a new client instance. So what I'm going to do right after here, I'm just going to say const query client, which is equals to new query client. We created the query client and let's supply that query client inside over here, right? So we supplied the query clients and we created a new instance and supplied it, and now our app is being wrapped inside that part. Okay, so let me get back over here and let me keep it simple, RAFCE app.jsx. And if I refresh this, every stuff needs to be worked perfectly without any issue, so we don't have any errors at all. Now inside this app.jsx, so I'm going to delete this. So I'm going to import certain stuff from here. From where? From the React itself. I need the suspense and the lazy loading. Let's bring the suspense, and I need the lazy loading function. Okay, then I need the error boundaries. We need to handle the error boundaries, right? So for that, we need to get the React error boundary. This one, that particular package, React error boundary. So if you copy it and if you open it, you can understand their complete documentation, go through it, so you can understand what is this and all those stuff. So here I'm going to stop it anyway. npm run, sorry, add React boundary, clear, npm run dev. So let's refresh this. So there is no issues at all. And now I need to import that error boundaries as well as import from React error boundary. And here inside the React error boundary, let me bring the error boundary component. Perfect. Now the heavy component, which is going to be the post component. So here I'm going to create myself a new component called post.jsx, because this is the place where we are going to fetch the API and everything, right? So for the time being, I'm just going to say, oops, RAFCE, and I'm going to say post. So let me get back to the app.jsx. So I need to bring the post components as the lazy loading component. So let's say const post is equals to lazy, open it, an arrow function. Then I need to import that component from the /components/posts. That's the components needs to be loaded lazy. Then for the error handling, of course, we're going to have a separate component for error loading and the error. So let's bring the loading.jsx and RAFCE. I'm just going to say loading, and inside the loading stuff, I'm just, for the time being, I'm going to display the text like this. Then we need to bring the error fallback UI as well as, so error.jsx. And here I'm just going to say RAFCE error fallback. So here we can simply say something went wrong, please try again later, something like this. So save it. This is the error handling and the loading fallback UIs which we needed. Now inside here, what I'm going to do is, first I need to wrap this entire division inside the error boundary. Then for this, I need to supply the fallback UI, which is going to be error fallback UI, which we do have in our hand. And inside here, I need to bring the suspense, and I need to say the fallback UI for the loading, which in case it's going to be the loading. Then inside the suspense, this is the place where we need to render our posts, which will be loading a little bit later. So save it. Now you can see if I refresh it, it's showing loading state and it's displaying the post. It's handled it perfectly. Now inside this post.jsx, this is the place where we are going to use the real React queries and stuff and everything. So here I'm going to bring the import from at tan stack React query, and inside over here you need to get that use query, oops, not use queries, use query to create the query. So I need to fetch the data, right? So const fetch, either you can keep that function over here or keep that function somewhere else inside the library file and put it inside. Okay, for just for the better understanding, let me keep it right now over here, but in a real production level you should keep it in a separate file and handle all those things separately. Okay, just for understanding, fetch post is equals to, I'm going to create an asynchronous function, and inside that function, oops, my bad. And inside this function, this is the place where we are going to say const response is equals to await fetch. We need that, copy this, fetch slash, we need to fetch the post, so post. Okay, then right after here, if I don't have the response as dot okay, if that doesn't have, then I need to throw a new error. Throw new error. What that error is going to be, failed to fetch the post, something like this. If everything is okay, of course it's going to return this JSON data outside that function. Okay, now inside this post, inside over here, inside this post, this is the place where we need to use the query. So I'm just going to say const is equals to use query, open it, and here I just need the data. I don't need the loading state or error state, because we have a error boundary to handle the error, and we have the loading state for handle the loading, we have the suspense. So I don't need to collect that state, just the data itself, it's enough for me. So here I need to say the query key. First you need to set the query key for the unique caching identifier, which is going to be the post. Then I need to supply the query function, which function that it's going to use for the data fetch. I'm going to use the fetch post. Then we are using the suspense, right? So let's say suspense is equals to true. Save it. And now if I refresh this, okay, so so far there is no mistakes, and loading is working perfectly, and we are getting the data, everything is loading perfectly over here. So if everything is loaded perfectly, I just need to display the data dot length, the 100. Even if I refresh it, it will handles it perfectly. Okay, so yeah, that's the pretty much stuff, right? So if let's right after here, let me create one more division. Let's try to print all those things. So data dot map, let's get the each and every post out of it. Then I'm gonna create a paragraph tag, or let's go with the paragraph tag itself. Paragraph tag, let's apply the key which is going to be the post dot id. Then here I'm just going to bring the post dot title. See, we have all those hundreds posts, titles and everything. Now even if I refresh it, the loading states will load it properly, and you will get that. And yeah, this is it. This is pretty much how you need to use, right? So the React query manages the server state, and the suspense manages the loading UI for you, and the error boundary manages the errors, and the lazy loading improves your performance. So this is the modern React way to build your scalable applications, right? So yeah, that's the pretty much done. And if you have any questions, and if you have any doubts, or if I explained it anything in a wrong way, please comment it in the description. And if you are looking for any particular video or any concepts, please drop that in the comment sections as well as. And as I said, we are bringing the huge projects as well as, and we are dropping it in, we are going to drop it every Sunday, at least every Sunday or 2 weeks once. We are trying to bring the real full stack project for you. So stay tuned, or you can drop all your requirements completely in the descriptions, and we are happy to help you out. All right, I'll see you in the next video. Welcome back, guys. Hope you're doing great. It's Vitri here. So in our previous video, we learned useEffect, use context, suspense, Redux toolkit, React query, and suspense and lazy loading, all these stuffs briefly. So if you haven't watched that video, so click the link in the description below, or you can see the on the top right corner, click it so you can watch that, all those React hooks and everything. And today we are going to learn the most important React hooks that every developer must know to write clean, performant, and professional React code. Basically, in React, hooks are not just an APIs, they represent how you think about the state and its performance and its architecture. Right? So in this video, we will understand 4 essential React hooks, why they exist and when to use them. And finally, we build a professional component using all of them together. Right? So we are going to start it from the beginner examples and at the end, and we are going to build one professional component with all the hooks together. So what are the hooks that we are going to learn today? So we are going to learn use reference. So let me close all these things, close others. We are going to talk about these hooks. These are the hooks that we are going to learn about: use reference, use memo, and the useReducer. Okay, use memo, callback, reducer. These are the hooks that we are going to talk about today. Okay, so in this thing, the very first one, which is going to be the use reference. So basically, we are going to learn about what is use reference. So use reference means it is not a state. You need to keep it in mind. Use reference hook, it's not a state. Use reference is used to store a mutable value that does not trigger a re-render when it changes. Right? That's the important stuff that you need to understand. Okay, so use reference is used to store a mutable value that does not trigger a re-render when it changes. Okay, so there are two main uses for using this. First one, it helps us to access the DOM elements. Okay, it helps us to access the DOM elements. Then it helps us to store the mutable values like the previous state, like a timers, like a flag values. So these are the things, the two main cases over here. So why the use reference exists? Why we need it? That's the first question we need to. If it is not a state, then why I need it? So React state causes re-renders, right? Of course, state causes the re-renders. So some values need to be persistent, but should not be update the UI, right? At that point, we use the use references. So, and one more thing, it gives us the direct DOM access, right? Because sometimes we required it. These are the cases. To resolve these issues, we use the use reference hook. And the second one, situations when I need to use the use reference hook. In order to access your DOM elements like inputs for focus or for scrolling or your DOM window listeners, at that point we use the use references. Then storing the previous value, as I said. Then for the timers, intervals, flag values, all these things, at this point we need to use the use reference hooks. And we should not use it for the state, UI state. We never use the use reference hook. So now let's talk about the example, right? For a beginner to understand what is the use reference. Okay, let's go with the beginner example itself, and let me make the text a little bit bigger so you can see it clearly. All right, so a little bit, let me reduce, it'll make this one bit so you can see it completely. Perfect. So now what I have to do is here I'm going to create a use reference code. So let's say const input reference, which equals to use reference hook. Use the use reference hook, make sure that is being imported properly, and initially the use reference hook needs to be null, which means this is going to represent the null value. Then inside this div, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create an input as a text. Then I'm going to say placeholder, enter some value, and here we are going to supply the reference. We're going to create a reference, so map that reference over here, input reference. Okay, then right after here I'm just going to say button, and which is the type of button itself, button. Then I'm gonna say focus input. That's a basic thing. When I click this, I need to focus this one. Okay, so on this on click, I'm gonna call a callback function. Then I'm going to use that input reference, use the input reference, then access the current instance which is mapped with that reference element, right? Which is, this is the one. Okay, so let's do the console log so you can understand. So console.log that input reference dot current value. If I click the inspect elements and get into the console, close it, and let me make it a little bit bigger so you can see it. Okay, now if I click this focus input, you can see it's printing that entire DOM element. So that's the current instance reference. Current instance reference is nothing but that input reference where we particularly map that reference. So that's the thing. So currently this input reference is mapped here, so it is printing, it's get printed. So now instead of console logging it, I just need to focus this particular input tag. So I'm just going to say input reference dot current. I need to focus it. So use the focus function to focus it. Okay, so save it. And now if I click it, you can see it is being focused, right? If let me show you one more time, click outside and click it, it is being focused now. So that's the beauty of using the use reference hook. Okay, so let me explain one more time. So we are using this use reference, right? That creates an object. Basically, it's create an object called current. What does it create? It creates an object called current, and particularly is going to be null, right? So that's the reason we are using input reference dot current. Okay, then React assigns the DOM node to this particular current. That is what happening. So this node, it's been assigned to this current instance. So it makes sure that no re-renders happens whenever you're trying to access this node by using that input reference. So let's talk about the differentiations between the use reference and the use state. So that's the one important thing that you need to understand. So because most of them make mistakes at that point only. So use reference and the use state. So use reference doesn't create any re-renders, but use states causes the re-render, because if the state changes, component needs to re-render. Then use reference is always mutable, you can change it, but it's mutable, and use state is immutable. Okay, so and use reference, it's only used for the DOM and its values, and the use state, it's only used for the UI state. Okay, that's the thing. All right, so this is all about the use reference hook. So if you have any questions on the use reference hook, please point the timeline and post your questions in the comment section. I'm happy to help you out. All right, so now let's move on to the use memo hook. Okay, so we need to understand what is the use memo hook. The use memo hook basically just for me, by the term memo itself, we can understand it's just used for the memorization. Use memo hook memorize the calculated value, so React doesn't recompute it on every render. Okay, think about it. If you are working on a cart, you have multiple items. Each items can have a different price and different quantity. We need to calculate the price with the quantity for every particular item, and you need to calculate the grand total and subtotal as well. As that's the tedious task. So at that point, for every render, if you are trying to recalculate the stuff again and again, it's gonna cause an performance issue. So at that situation, we use this to memorize the that calculated value. So I don't have to recompute it every time if there is no changes in that value which I have. So that's the beauty of using the use memo hook. So use memo hook catches the result of the calculation, so it is not recomputed on every rendered. Okay, so why the use memo hook exists? So React states re-renders frequently, right? So the expensive calculations might slow down the UI rendering. So some values depends only on the specific inputs. So at that point, recomputing the every tedious calculations, it's gonna cause you the performance issue. So overcome it, we use this use memo hook. So when to use? Only on heavy calculations, filtering the large data list, and derived values used on multiple times. Okay, so don't use the use memo hook for simple calculations, it's not necessary. All right, so now let's talk about the beginner examples over here. So we have this, right? Particularly we have this, and what I'm going to do is here from the React, I'm going to get the useMemo hook and as well as the use state, both of them. Okay, so now use state, I think it's not necessary. Let's keep it in that way. useMemo hook. So here I'm just going to say const expensive calculations is equals to an arrow function, and this function is basically going to receive the parameter as the number, object as number. So const result is equals to use memo hook, open it, and this is going to get an arrow function, open it, and at the end you need to supply the array injection just like the use effect itself. No changes at all. Now inside this use memo hook, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to say console.log calculating, console.log calculating, something like this. Then I'm going to say a return that number, okay, multiply it with some series number of values, something like this. I think that would be perfect. And this needs to be re-rendered only if there is any changes on the number. If not, don't change it. Okay, so and right after that, yep, so this is the syntax. Basically this is the syntax. This is how we use and calculate and store the expensive calculations. So now let's talk about some real world real case scenarios. Like, so I'm just going to close this stuff, close it, right? So I'm going to bring myself some sample data over here for the products. Like, I do have a list of array of objects. This is how in a real case scenarios you do have. So think about it that you want to calculate some like the filtering. Let's do some filtering over here. Okay, so what we want to do is a search. Let's try the search filter. Like most common real cases we use that. Okay, so what I have to do is I just need to refilter it every time whenever someone types some input, right? So what we usually do, so we just do something like this: filter products is equals to something like products dot filter. We use the filter method, then we'll access every single item out of it, then we'll get the item dot name first, then we need to convert it into a lowercase, right? Then after that we need to make sure if it is includes that particular search term which we don't have yet, right? This is how we used to search every single time, right? This is what we used to search, right? But this filter runs on every re-renders, right? That is going to cause the performance issue. Right now we have only 4 objects, so it doesn't make any sense. But in your real cases you might have more than thousands of records, so at that point it's going to cause you a series of issue, right? So this is not applicable over there. So that's the place where we need to use the use memo hook. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring the use state hook. Let's bring the search, and by default it is going to be empty string. Then right after here what I'm going to do is I'm going to get the filter method. So I'm just going to say const filter products is equals to filter, that would be make sense, okay, filtered. Okay, then right after here I'm going to use the use memo hook, which is going to take 2 different parameters. One is going to be the function and another one is going to be array dependency injections. If there is any changes on the state of the search, or if there is any changes on the products, I need to recalculate it and I need to get the computed value in the memorized value, right? Otherwise I don't have to do that. So I'm just going to say console.log here filtering products, something like this. Then right after here at the return, you need to return by filtering the data. So return products dot filter method. We are going to do the same stuff, but we are going to put it inside the use memo hook. Then I'm going to get the item out of it, accessing the item dot name, then converting it to a lowercase, not to a lower case, convert it into a lower case, then I need to make sure that includes the text which is inside the search. So convert the search also into a lowercase. Okay, so that is going to calculate and put the filtered product in your hand. Now let's use this same input reference itself. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to here on change I'm going to access the event, and I'm going to set that event to the search. Get the search and access it e dot target dot value. Get that value from it and put it inside the search input like this. Search e dot target dot search value. Now right after here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say filtered products dot map, open it, and let's get the item out of it. Then I need to render it, right? So I'm going to bring a paragraph tag with the key. Basically it's going to be item.id itself. Then let's render the item.name. Okay, so now if I save these changes, you should be able to see that you do have iPhone, Samsung and everything. Now if I type something over here, let's say if I search for Mac, the M, it's trying to figure it out whether that particular character contains in that in the search character inside the item name, right? MD is not that, but when you're typing something, see, it's literally doing the stuff, filtering everything. So this is the most complicated stuff, right? When you're working with a really big bunch of data. So that's the point we use the debouncing effect. So every time when I press, it needs to wait for milliseconds, then it needs to trigger the API. Otherwise, it's going to cost us, the API cost will be hit skyrocketed. Okay, so there are lots of stuff that we need to discuss, but I hope you get the point, like what's the purpose of the useMemo hook. All right, so this is all about the useMemo hook. Like without useMemo, the calculations runs on every re-renders, right? Every render, it's going to run that useMemo calculation just like the usual way which we use to calculate. And with the help of the useMemo hook, it runs only when there is a number changes it's happening, like the text changes if it is happening, if the product changes if it's happening, then only it is going to run it. Otherwise it's not going to trigger it, right? So when you should not use the useMemo hook, you should not use the useMemo hook for very small calculations or for the premature optimizations. You should not use it. All right, so now let's go for the third one, which is going to be your useCallback hook, right? So just like the useMemo hook, this useCallback hook is also used to memorize something, but useMemo hook memorize the calculated value, but here the useCallback hook memorize the function reference, not the result. It's going to only memorize the function reference, not your function result. So it's used to preventing it from being recreated on every render, just like the way we use the useMemo hook to prevent re-rendered or recomputed on every render of your UI. We use this useCallback hook for the memorizing the function reference, for preventing it from recreated on every render. Okay, so why the useCallback hook exists? Think about it. Every render, if a function is keep on getting created again and again and again, it's going to create a memory leak. So we use the useCallback hooks for the functions, or like functions are recreated on every render. To avoid it, we use the useCallback hook. So this causes unnecessary, if you don't use it, it causes unnecessary re-renders in child components. So it is important when you're passing callbacks as a props, right? So the use callback hook is really important. If you're passing that callback reference functions as a props to a child component, it's going to cause an unnecessary re-renders. To overcome it, we use the use callback hook. So when to use the use callback hook? When you're passing a functions to a memorized component. So every handlers, event handlers, not every event handlers in it needs to be used as a use callback hook, because for the performance critical aspects. So if you're more concerned about your performance, make sure every event handlers as a use callback hook, unless if there is any changes that needs to be recreated, then it will be preserved. Okay, so And most importantly, don't use it for every function. Only if it is necessary, use it. Otherwise, don't use it. Even if you're using it for everything, it's going to cause the performance issue. All right. So now let's talk about some like real cases, scenarios for use callback hook. Okay. So here we have these products and all those things, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create myself some internal components. So I'm just going to comment all these things, right? And right over here. Okay. So over here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create myself some internal components. So let's say, um, mm, 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 mm. internal component. Okay, let's keep it. Let's create a product item. So I'm just going to say product item, which is going to be right. So basically this product item is going to get the complete product. It's going to collect the complete product. Then at the end, it's going to return this. No need of using these things. Okay, so save it. This is just the product stuff that we want to use, and let's make sure that is working. So what I'm going to do is comment all these stuffs on this one. Instead of using this paragraph tag, I'm gonna bring this product item. Then I'm gonna supply the key, which is going to be item.id. Then I need to supply the complete product itself, which is going to be your item. So save it. You should be able to see that same item stuff over there, which is perfect, right? So now right after here, what I'm going to do is, or here, so basically we are going to keep a function. So let me show you the differentiations. What happens if I don't have the use callback and what happens if I do have the use callback. So here I'm just going to keep a normal function, which is going to be const handle add to cart, something like this, add to cart. And we are going to get the complete product information over here. We will get the complete product information. Then here I'm just going to say console.log added, something like that. Added, we added that particular product dot name. We added that product into the cart, just for understanding. Okay. So now what happens is, so we need to pass this function. We need to pass this function as a reference over here, right? So what I'm going to do is, for this, I'm going to have a function called on add, something like this. That's a prop. And over here, I'm just going to use that function on click. I'm going to simply add that, get that function. Then on add, I'm going to send that product to that function. Okay, so basically this function is just a reference for this function, which means if anything happening over here, it is going to trigger this function, and this is going to re-render unnecessarily if you're not using the use callback hook. Okay, so I'm going to pass this over here. So on add, we are passing this handle add to cart as a reference. Save it. Okay, so now if I click this, if I click any name, you should be able to see added Samsung TV. And if you click MacBook, so basically it looks like it's working fine. But what happening here over here is, since we are passing this function as a reference to this child component, every time whenever the child component re-renders, it is going to recreate the same functions again and again and again, right? So that's the new handle add to cart function, which is recreated every time whenever I'm clicking, right? So the product items, it's re-renders unnecessarily. All right, that causes the performance issue. So that's the place where we use the use callback hook. So we're gonna cut this out. Let us delete that stuff, and let's use the use callback hook. Open it, and inside this hook, we're gonna have a callback function. Okay, then of course we're gonna have the array dependency injections as well. As keep it empty if you're not going to use it. Then inside over here, inside this, I'm gonna get that product as the function parameter. Then I'm just going to say console.log added what particular product name is being added, product.name. Save it. This is also going to give you the same approach. Let me show you. If I click this, still the both of the output is going to same. But why the same function reference, even if your child is happening re-rendering, if it is happening, still we are using the same functional reference over here. So the child can be optimized. We can make sure that it's been optimized when you're using the react.memo, right? So the combination of useCallback and react.memo will hit it's a most favorite stuff. Okay, so the component needs to be, this component needs to be memorized. So that's the place where we use the react.memo to memorize your entire child component. If there is nothing is changing, if you're simply supplying the value, rendering it, then keep rendering it. Unless or until if there is no changes in it, we need to keep that component also be preserved, and that function also needs to be preserved. So at that point we use the react.memo, right? So what I have to do is just cut this out from here to here, then use this react. We need to import this react as well as we have the react. So we are going to use the react.memo, use the memo. This is to memorize your entire component. Okay, open the callback function, paste it, paste the component code over here. Till you will get the same stuff, right? All these things is just for what? For your performance only. You can't visually you can't see the changes, but at the background it will increase the performance. Okay, so without use callback, memo is useless. This memo, if you're not using use callback over here, there it is over here, then this memo is useless. But with use callback, the memorization will works and the code performance will get optimized. All right, so this is all about the use callback hook. I hope you understand, but still you might have a lot of misunderstanding and a lot of questions. And yep, so basically when you're working with the real case scenarios in a real project, and that point only you can see the performance, how fast it has been doing that action compared to if you're not using the use callback and use memo. And okay, but the overall concept is this, right? If you have any questions, please leave it in the comment section below, right? So now let's move on to the next one, which is going to be your useReducer, the one last one, the finally one. So useReducer is the alternative to the use state. useReducer is the alternative for the use state for complex state logic. Okay, so that's the situation where we use the useReducer. Okay, so basically it's a hook for managing complex or structured data or a structured state logic using for actions and for the reducers. Okay, so why we need to use reducers? So use states becomes messy when you're working with multiple updates, right? Of course, think about it in a single state value. If you're doing a lots and lots of complicated actions, the single state it get more messier. So complex transitions need some predictability. So that's why we use the useReducer hook. So we use the same pattern in the Redux toolkit, which we already discussed on the previous sections. Okay. So then when I need to use, since we know that it is the alternative for the state, so when I need to use this, so if you're having a multiple actions related to the same state value, use the useReducer. And more for complex update logics, you're doing complex logic calculations with the same state value, go for it. And if you need a very predictable state transitions, then go for it. Don't use for simple counted logics, don't use for simple toggle actions, that's not necessary. Okay, so now let's talk about some example over here for understanding this, how does it is going to work and everything. All right, so yep, just one more point. Instead of taking it as an alternative for a state, think of it like a local redux, right? A local redux to do some complex actions, right? So like a more like a centralized logic in a single place, something like that. So we have some sample data over here, but this data doesn't have the quantity in it. So let's get the quantity for each and everything. add the comma and paste the quantity over here. Now we have some quantity stuffs over here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to clean this stuff. I think let's clean it. Okay, let me clean it. I don't need that stuff anymore because we already discussed all those things and everything. So let me keep it clean. It's not necessary for having all those stuffs. Okay. So right after here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create myself a state, right? So let's create a state, use state products, set products, which is going to be our product system. Let's keep it as data products, or because everything is going to be same name, that is also going to be a miss here. Get that data and put it in the local state for the products. Now we have the product states in our hand, right? So if I'm simply using the use state for complex calculations, for increasing the quantity and for decreasing the quantity, what I will do, I'll just create a function called increase quantity, which is equals to going to be an arrow function. And here what I will do, I will get the ID of that specific product. And then I'm just going to say set products, update that products by incrementing the quantity. So products.map, from that I'm going to access the single product out of it. Then I'm going to identify that product by using the p.id should be equals to the ID which I'm supplying in it. If it is equals to, then I need to preserve all the values which is already in that particular product. So destructure that product. Then I need to update one specific value which is going to be the quantity, right? In that, which is going to be access the p.quantity, whatever the quantity it is, I need to increment the value in it. Then if it is not there, I just need to return the complete product itself. See what exactly we are doing. If the user clicks the increase quantity button, at that point we are going to set the products by updated value by using the map function. With the help of the map function, I'm going to render every single extract every single product from it. Then we are trying to figure it out. If that ID which I tried, if I supplied into that function, if that ID, if it is equals to the product ID, then we will isolate that particular product alone. Then if both of them same, I'm going to create a new object by destructuring all the previous value which I do have in that product. Then I'm just going to update the quantity, replacing the quantity with the product quantity plus 1. If that ID is not matches, simply return the product. So this is the tedious task. So let's do the same thing with the decrement. If I was trying to decrease the quantity, I will do the same stuff over here as -1, right? So this is the tedious task, right? This is the real pain point over here. So the issues over here is, what's the real issue is repeated logic, right? And it's really hard to scale it up. And we don't have the no clear action intent over here. Debugging over here, it's really messy. It's really messy, guys, when you're trying to debug over here. So this is the place where we use the useReducer to keep it clean and simple action stuff, right? So let's leave this part over here. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to say const cart reducer. We're going to create ourselves a new, and that is going to get this function, then an action. It's going to get the state and the action, two different things. Okay, inside here I'm going to use the switch case, use the switch, and here I'm going to supply the action dot type, what kind of action it is being triggered. As I already said, it's just the local redux, so it's quite exactly the same logic. Open it. Then here it's going to be case increment. If it is a case increment underscore quantity, then we are going to do some stuff. What we are going to do, we are going to return with state, whatever the state I do have, state dot map function. Open it, isolate the single item out of it, item. Then we are going to make sure that item dot id should be equals to the action dot payload, which is the ID itself. If it is say so, then we have to do the same stuff what we did over here. Instead of p, use the item, because that's the item value which we are getting it from the map function. So item, save it. This is the single action, right? This is the single action. I'm going to copy this, then I'm going to paste it. If it is case decrement quantity, instead of this, I'm gonna keep it as plus for increment, minus for the decrement. Okay, if I want to remove case remove underscore item, if that's the action type, then I just need to say return state dot filter. We just use the filter method. Then I'm going to access the item out of it. Then I just need to make sure that item dot id should not be equals to action dot payload. Okay, by that way we can remove that item. Then by default I'm just going to return the state. That's it. This is all about the this is all about the cart reducers which we have in our hand. All right, so now how I can use this. Okay, so what I'm going to do is right after here I'm going to create const is equals to, I'm going to get the useReducer. Basically useReducer, it's going to give you the array of values which is going to be your that state value, that is the cart, and the action functions, these functions to trigger these action functions, which is going to be, let's keep it as the dispatch itself. That's the name that we are trying to give it for that. Then useReducer, I need to supply the cart reducer which I have created. Then I need to supply the initial values which we do have in our state, which is the product itself. Okay, so now we have that cart and the dispatch. Then what I have to do is basically we are going to render the multiple items with their names and its quantity, and we are going to give it a button to do some actions with it. So right after here I'm just going to say cart dot map, use the map function, open it, get the item, then we have to render it. So let's create a div, empty div, then let's apply the key which is going to be item.id itself. Inside over here I'm going to bring an h3 tag which is going to render the item.name. Then I'm going to have a paragraph tag which is going to display the quantity. Let's keep it as qty. Then item.qty. Right, then right after here now you should be able to see we have the iPhone, Samsung along with this quantity. Right, then I'm going to bring myself a button. Let's keep it as a single division, and I'm going to bring it a button button. Over here I'm gonna have an on click actions. Let's keep it as plus, bring one more stuff, that is going to be minus. Okay, otherwise let's bring this quantity and put it in between over here. That would make sense. Okay, we have the plus and minus sign for each and every product. So for this let's use the style attribute. We can make it a little bit flex, which is going to be display it as flex, and a gap which is going to be 20 pixels. Now that's how it looks like. Okay, that would be perfectly fine. Okay, so now whenever I'm clicking this button, I'm just going to say on click. When I click this, I'm going to have a callback function. Then I'm going to trigger that dispatch, open it. I'm going to send an object, two different objects. One which is going to be the type, get the type object. So basically the type which is going to be this increment type, increment quantity, because that is what we are trying to do with the plus one. Then I need to send the payload, because inside we are receiving the payload, action.payload. So the payload which is going to be the id, which is going to be the item.id itself. Right, so let me clear this. Let's copy this and paste this stuff over here as well. As instead of increment in quantity, I'm just going to keep it as the decrement quantity for this. Save it. Now every time whenever I click this plus sign, it is going to increase that particular quantity, and if I click the x minus sign, it is going to decrease that quantity. We have to do the same stuff for removing as well as. So I'm going to copy this and paste it over here, and I'm going to keep the X mark. This time this is going to be the remove item, paste it, and the payload, which is still, it's going to be the item.id itself. Now you will have the X mark as well as. So I'm going to increase the quantity, it's working, decrease, it's working. Oops, when I click this, why it's removing the quantity? That doesn't make any sense. Oh my goodness, I changed the name over there. That's the reason it was doing that stuff. Okay, so instead of remove item, I need to paste that remove item over here, not there, because I paste the remove item for the minus button. So that's the reason it's not working. So now the increment is working, decrement is working, and when I click this, it is completely removed from that. So that's how we use the same state, but we use the complex logic actions with the same state. We use the useReducer for it. More or less, useReducer is quite exactly the same as your Redux, but that is the Redux toolkit for a global state. useReducer is for your local state. That's the important stuff. Okay, so we finally discussed all the use reducers, use reference scope, use memo hook, and use callback with the simple data with some real case scenarios examples. So if you have any questions in this, you have to drop your questions along with the timeline, what you don't understand, and if I explain anything in a wrong way, please point out in the question in the comment section, and I'm happy to review it, and I'm happy to correct myself, and I will give you the proper action answers as well as. Okay, so yeah, this is it. I'll see you in the next video with the more interesting content. All right, take care. Welcome back, guys. Hope you all doing great, and it's Betsy here. So on the previous sections, we discussed about few most important hooks like user like